I will raise them up a prophet, and this is talking about Jesus, as was verse 15. I will raise them up a prophet from among their brethren like unto thee, so like unto Moses, and will put my words in his mouth. So this is Jesus looking. Jesus looked straight to the Father, don't forget. And everything Jesus said would be exactly as God would say. Unlike man, everything he says, though he tries his best to speak on God's behalf, would have the flesh to contend with and would tarnish those words. Jesus, of course, didn't, and everything Jesus said was coming straight from the Father. Everything Moses said was coming straight from the Father. He spoke to God mouth to mouth, but of course he did all this through Jesus. Though Moses was aware of Jesus and prophesied of Jesus, these prophecies indeed coming true, which puts Moses in the category of a true prophet of God. I will raise them up a prophet from among their brethren like unto thee, and I will put my words in his mouth, and he shall speak unto them all that I shall command him. So Jesus looking straight to the Father, in other words, it shall come to pass that whosoever will hearken unto my words, which he shall speak in my name, I will require it of him. But the prophet which shall presume to speak a word in my name, which I have not commanded him to speak, or that shall speak in the name of other gods, even that prophet shall die. So again there, giving the penalty to false prophets of what would happen to you if you say you're speaking in God's name, but you're speaking in the name of other gods, and it's not God. When the prophet speaketh in the name of the Lord, if the thing follow not, nor come to pass, that is the thing which the Lord have not spoken, but the prophet have spoken it presumptuously. Thou shalt not be afraid of him. Well, Moses, of course, didn't speak this presumptuously, and it did indeed come true. In that is Jesus opening up the eyes of these two and going through the scriptures and pointing to the prophecies of Moses, which indeed talked about himself, and I raised them up a prophet from among their brethren like unto thee. This is Jesus. So, and he goes on to open up their eyes, and he talks about the prophets. There are other prophets who, of course, spoke about Jesus. And you have Isaiah talking about Jesus. And here's the prophecy about the crucifixion of Jesus here. And in Isaiah chapter 53, verse 3, and here's this coming true pretty much to the letter, you might say, talking about Jesus. And so you can picture Jesus here opening up the eyes of these two men and showing them what's written in the scriptures regarding himself, because he starts with Moses and goes into the prophets. He is despised and rejected of men. He's talking about himself, talking about Jesus. So you can picture Jesus opening up the pages of the Old Testament back then and showing these two the various prophecies that are written of himself, and to open up the eyes of their understanding of how he indeed was Jesus, and all of this was prophesied to happen. Even the crucifixion was prophesied in the scriptures here. He is despised and rejected of men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. And we, as it were, hid our faces from him. He was despised, and we esteemed him not. Surely he had borne our griefs and carried our sorrows, yet we did esteem him stricken, smitten of God, and afflicted. So all of this was Jesus being smitten of God, in other words, punished by God, but Jesus taking a punishment for mankind. So surely he had borne our griefs and carried our sorrows, yet we did esteem him stricken, smitten of God, and afflicted. But he was wounded for our transgressions. He wasn't punished for his own sins. He was wounded for our transgressions. So, in other words, we humans, mankind, deserves a punishment, a divine chastisement from God. This really is usually summed up as God's wrath. So eventually mankind will suffer God's wrath. But Jesus Christ took this wrath of God upon himself to save us from a divine chastening from God. So surely had borne our griefs and carried our sorrows, yet we did esteem him stricken, smitten of God, and afflicted. But he was wounded for our transgressions. He was bruised for our iniquities. So all of this punishment inflicted upon Jesus, being a token or a symbol, if that's the way to put it, of God's punishment upon mankind for his sins. This being the wrath of God, largely poured down upon Jesus, as though Jesus taking a punishment on our behalf. But he was wounded for our transgressions. He was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement, so it's a chastisement from God upon Jesus, though Jesus had done no wrong. The chastisement of our peace was upon him, so we have peace in Jesus. If we receive Jesus Christ into our lives and into our hearts, and make our peace with God, we are no longer opposed to God. The carnal mind is empty against God. But receiving Jesus, we can no longer be the enemy of God, but be at peace with God and be at peace within ourselves, knowing that we have Jesus Christ in our hearts, knowing that he has taken the punishment for us. And when we stand before God, we can show God that we chose his son, Jesus Christ. We receive Jesus Christ into our hearts, into our lives, and therefore we have a form of a cloak for our sins, and our sins are covered, and therefore we can stand before God and no longer feel that we have to be chastised or to go under God's wrath, as mankind will do. In the last days in particular, it talks of the wrath of God, which will be poured out upon mankind at the second coming of Jesus Christ. So at the second coming of Jesus Christ after the tribulation, this is where a lot of preachers get these two mixed up. They talk about the tribulation and the wrath. Where there's the tribulation when the world goes into great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, no nor ever shall be. And except those days should be short, in other words, stops, Jesus Christ returns to deliver his own, those that have chosen Jesus in their lives, out of this world and out of the eventual wrath of God. So this is what Jesus came to save us from, the eventual wrath of God. So he taking a punishment for us. But he was wounded for our transgressions, he was bruised for our iniquities, the chastisement of our peace was upon him, and with his stripes we are healed. All we like sheep have gone astray, we have turned every one to his own way, and the Lord have laid on him the iniquity of us all. So Jesus here taking a divine chastening for us to save us from the eventual wrath to come. He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. So this is Jesus, as you might recall, he was arrested, taken to Pilate. He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. And Pilate, they simply didn't open his mouth, like a dumb sheep when he was taken before his shearers, yet he opened not his mouth. He is brought as a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before his shearers is dumb. So he opened not his mouth. So Jesus didn't open his mouth, but simply went to these shearers like a dumb sheep. He was taken from prison. When he was taken from another man's, from prison, he was taken prison and from judgment. And who shall declare his generation? For he was cut off, in other words, crucified, out of the land of the living. For the transgression of my people was he stricken. And he made his grave with the wicked. So he's buried in another man's grave. A rich man gave up his tomb for Jesus to be buried in. And with the rich in his death, because he had done no violence, neither was any deceit in his mouth. Yet it pleased the Lord to bruise him. He had put him to grief. When thou shalt make his soul an offering for sin, he shall, and so on it goes. So Jesus dying for the sins of mankind In other words, and Jesus opening all of the eyes of these two disciples up to all of these prophecies that are written in the prophets about him. So, beginning at the word Moses and all the prophets, he expounded unto them all the scriptures and the things concerning himself. And they drew nigh unto the village whither they went, and made as though he would have gone further. So it looked like Jesus was going to move on. But they constrained him, saying, Abide with us. For it is toward evening, and the day is far spent. And he went in to tarry with them. And it came to pass, as he sat at meat with them, he took bread and blessed it, and brake and gave it to them. And their eyes were opened, and they knew him, and he vanished out of their sight. So suddenly he breaks this bread, and suddenly they know him. It was Jesus all along speaking with them, opening up their eyes to these various scriptures that prophesied of him. And there he was, stood before him, and they now having their eyes opened, and being now much wiser after the event. It was indeed prophesied that Jesus would come. It was indeed prophesied that a prophet like unto Moses would come, that Jesus would be like a dumb sheep taken before his shearers is dumb, that he would be crucified and would take a punishment for mankind. And their eyes were opened, and they knew him not, and he vanished out of their sight. And they said one to another, Did not our hearts burn within us while he talked with us by the way, and while he opened to us the scriptures? And they rose up the same hour and returned to Jerusalem.